you. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our remote meeting of the Police and Crime Panel. I am Councillor Lucy Hovels, Chair of the panel. Please note this meeting is broadcasted live on the Council's website and will be available to be viewed for a minimum of 6 months. I would like to give you a very warm welcome to members, officers and any member of the public or media who are watching this live feed of this meeting. Before I commence with the formal business on the agenda, I would like to cover some housekeeping rules. For those participating in the meeting, if you could please only speak when invited to speak by myself as chair. Keep your microphone on mute at all times unless invited to speak. If you wish to speak, please type RTS in the chat function and that will indicate to me that you wish to speak. Please bear in mind that all participants can see the messages in the chat function. Once invited to speak, please introduce yourself with your name, position, and unless you have already introduced yourself earlier in the meeting. If I lose connection, please note Councillor Jones, the Vice Chair of this panel, will take over in my absence until connection is restored. Before I move on to apologies and absence, which will have been noted by Ian Croft, can I say to the Acting Police and Crime Commissioner, Steve White, if you would like to address this meeting, please. I'll invite Steve to make some comments.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Lucy, and good morning to the panel and others that have joined us this morning. I thought it appropriate just for me to spend a few moments to say a couple of words, because this will, if all goes according to plan anyway, this will be my last meeting as Acting Police Crime Victims Commissioner with your good selves, the panel, before the elections. And given the rather tumultuous last 2 years or 18 months certainly that we've had, I felt it appropriate just to say a few words. First and foremost, I wanted to say a very big thank you to the panel and to the support that I have had personally and that the office has had over what has been a rather difficult period in the history of Durham Police, not least because of the sad passing of Ron, of course. And I also wanted to pay tribute to my office and the staff who work in my office in terms of the way in which they have risen to the challenge that the death of Ron and all of the associated issues that has brought with it. And I think it's fair to say that on a number of occasions, particularly whilst grappling with the difficulties that having an acting PCC and the changes to the office brought, to then be faced with the pandemic, certainly there has been significant challenges for us all, of course, but I'm talking particularly about the office and the challenges that we've had. It's having said all of that about those challenges, and I think I've always made it clear since September 19, when I was appointed as the acting PCC, that my focus was always going to be on those two elements of the requirement of a police and crime commissioner, which is about the provision of an effective and efficient force for the people of Durham, and that's always been my focus. To a certain extent unencumbered by politics in a way, but also having to navigate through local politics at the same time. Perhaps to varying degrees of success, I have to admit. It's certainly been a steep learning curve for me, and I think actually it's, in terms of me returning to my role as chief executive post-election, I think yet again I find myself in a rather unique position, having experienced it firsthand in terms of being a police and crime commissioner and all of the challenges that that brings. So in summary, it's just to say a big thank you to the panel, a very large thank you to my staff, and finally a huge thank you to Sharon, who without her help we would have really struggled. And that's all I want to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. And obviously, I think we all know how challenging it's been and thrown in at the deep end and making all them changes. I've certainly seen a lot of that going on, even though it may have been going on behind the closed doors in terms of the restructure and all the things that's taken place. And it's good experience, I would say, doing that job now. Yeah, you probably have a better understanding of what that job's all about. And really the panel job is obviously to work with you and to work with Sharon, and obviously we'll be doing that when you go back to the day job, which you did, and you stepped in into them shoes, which was always going to be difficult. I'm sure everybody agrees with that, but like you say, you've got through it and made some huge changes, and some of that has been challenging, but certainly the work will continue and it goes on. So I think it's important that we note all of that within the minutes of the Police and Crime Panel, and it's placed on record. And obviously you'll take that learning back into that old job. And obviously the elections are coming up, and some of us may be around and some may not. But nevertheless, the work will continue and does make progress. So with that, I'll move on and note apologies for absence. We've just seen in the chat function, Councillor Dalston has sent his apologies, but he may join us throughout the meeting. Is there any more apologies, Ian?
No more apologies, Chair.
Item 2, substitutes.
No substitute members, Chair.
Item 3, declarations of interest. No declarations of interest. Item 4, minutes of the meeting held on the 4th of February. Can we agree those the minutes of the meeting, please?
Agreed, Chair.
Agreed. Thank you. Item 5, media report. This morning I welcome Lucy Constantine to present the report. I'll hand over to Lucy.
Thank you, Chair. Morning, everyone. Yep, so I'm Lucy Constantine and I'm the Senior Media Officer for the Office of the Police, Crime and Victims Commissioner. I'm just going to take us through the media report, which if I take it to section 1 in purpose, so this is just a brief paper to update on the press and social media coverage concerning the work of the Office and the Police, Crime and Victims Commissioner since the previous meeting. So we're just looking at coverage from towards the end of January and throughout February. So in section 2, as you can see, here I've highlighted our top press releases published. So I think there's some notable ones to highlight here in particular, which you might have seen. The naloxone feature, which was broadcast on ITV Tyne Tees on the 27th of January, which included a pre-record interview with Steve, the acting PCVC, about the Durham officers amongst the first to carry naloxone. Other notable press releases as well and coverage that I received in particular last month surrounding the funding that the officers gave to local groups and projects concerning online workshops around community safety. The Rape, Sexual Abuse and Counselling Centre also launched their first radio ad campaign, which came out of funding from our office, as well as highlighting support that we still have for victims of domestic abuse and sexual violence. And I think it's also in particular notable to highlight as well that the PCVC's office were highly commended for transparency and openness last month by the COPAC, which is the Board for Comparing Police and Crime Commissioners. And I think we were one of 18 that did receive that commendation for highly commended. So that was great to see them, the publications and everything that is open and transparent on our website. And I've taken section 3, which just covers our social media activity, in particular for February. As you can see on Twitter, under section 3 around followers, with the 6th highest among the PCCs. For Facebook, 2nd highest among all PCC officers. And on Instagram, our slightly smaller social media account, we are still 6th highest amongst PCCs. And we're seeing steady growth amongst all them social media channels as well. In regards to top social media posts, our top tweets here. So in regards to reach, the number of people who kind of see our content, are the number of people who see these in terms of reach. So for Twitter, nearly 5,000 in terms of reach for our top performing post around At Home Shouldn't Mean At Risk campaign, in regards to victim support and signposting our services. And it's great to see the Safer Streets Fund being one of the highest in terms of reach on Twitter and Facebook, which I'm sure you may have heard the Safer Streets scheme going on at the moment, which we're trying to raise awareness and highlight until the end of March. And in particular in columns, we've had a column from Steve around the roadmap out of lockdown and the urge to comply with current restrictions, and in One Darlington again, the magazine distributed in Darlington around the Safer Street scheme. And I just wanted to also mention, in line with the increasing accessibility and improver user friendliness, we are launching a new website on Monday. So this should be going live on Monday afternoon, which, as I mentioned, it'll increase great accessibility for users, and it'll be easier and quicker for members of the public to contact our office. So that should be going live on Monday afternoon. So I urge you all to have a look at our new website. I'm very excited for the launch. I know all of our office are, and there's been a lot of work that's been put into that. So thank you.
Thank you, Lucy. And I've got a question from Councillor David Boyes.
Well, it's more a comment than a question, Chair, but it's with regards to the highly commended for transparency and openness. I'm pleased to say, I'm not surprised to say, because if there's one thing I'll take from Steve's tenure as the PVC, I would say is he's faced all the difficult issues head on. He hasn't ducked anything, and we've had some really difficult issues this past year, especially with regards to finance. But he hasn't ducked them. He's faced them head on. He's put it all out the public. So, you know, as I say, it doesn't surprise me in the slightest. I hope after May that this is something that will continue. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. We'll make sure they're noted, David. Any other member have any comments or questions for Lucy? Steve, do you want to make a comment?
Yes, if I may, and thanks to David for those comments. And just to reiterate, Sharon's going to talk a little bit about the restructure later on in the meeting, but I just wanted to talk about the focus around media, and Lucy, who's relatively new in role, which is a different way in which the media department, if we can call it that, was running. And it's all part of that openness, transparency, and that engagement that is so vitally important. Which, as you know, I've since being the chief executive and also as the acting PCC, I've been very keen on. And as I've spoken at many panel meetings about the way in which we engage and the way in which we need to do it in a different way, that work continues, and the new website is going to be part of that. I will encourage you post Monday to have a look at it. It looks fantastic. But also in the social media space, which is so vitally important. And during the lockdown period, it's been so vital. And yet still, just to remind you, we are still reaching sort of 13,000 people a year, asking communities what they think about policing, what they think should be the priorities. And certainly in terms of preparation for the next PCC, I would like to think that we're in a very, very strong position to be able to help them make the judgments and the decisions that they're going to want to make. So I just wanted to make that comment, really.
Thank you. And thank Lucy for coming today. I'm sure we're going to see a lot more of you, Lucy. So that's nice. And I've got the recommendation there to note the information contained within the report. Can we agree?
Agreed, Chair.
Thank you. Moves us on to item 6, which is revenue and capital budgets. And this morning we've got Steve White and Gary Ridley who will present on this report, please.
Yeah, so again from me, good morning. This is definitely where I slopey shoulder it to Gary, because he knows the detail better than I. You're aware of the headlines because we discussed it at the last Police and Crime Panel meeting, but Gary will go through some more detail. Gary, are you there?
Yeah, on the screen it shows Gary's with us.
Yes, morning everybody. Good to see you all again. This is just a follow-up really from the last meeting where we just set out some thoughts around the increase in the precept in terms of additionality of service delivery. And what we've got on the report is 5 areas of investment, or 5 of the overall frontline investment areas. When we think about the police officer uplift, first of all, the government's given the force funding for an extra 68 police officers in the current year, and indeed funding for another 68 in the coming financial year. What we've done, we did make a very strong commitment to make sure that we deliver on that uplift, and I'm pleased to say that by the 31st of March, in a couple of weeks' time, we will have over-delivered on that by I think it's about 18 police officers now. And we're going to carry those forward into certainly into the next year and beyond. And what we've not only have we over delivered that by around 25%, we've also recruited experienced police officers, essentially from other police forces. And whilst on the one hand these individuals cost us more money to employ because they're at the top of the pay grade, normally about £20,000 per head in terms of money, what they do come oven ready, as it were, straight out of the box, and can hit the ground running. And crucially, we have managed to recruit some detectives and a couple of sergeants who are more expensive still to work in custody. These are 2 areas of service delivery where most police forces struggle. There is a significant national shortage of qualified detectives, and I'm really pleased to say that we've managed to recruit some more, because this is a really, really important part of the overall investigative service, and it is quite often an aspect of service delivery that the public doesn't see. So I think that's good. Secondly, Pcsos. We have an above average number of Pcsos compared to other police forces. We normally do an intake in sort of December time. We've brought that forward at least 6 months. Our intention is that we will recruit 20 new Pcsos in the middle of June. That's the working assumption. We are doing the interviews as we speak. I'm confident we will get that many. What it means in practice, we'll probably have some dual running where we double them up for a couple of weeks, just so they can learn a bit of street craft, as we call it. And the assumption going forward in the future years is that we'll be looking to do annual intakes either April or May going forward. Again, I think that's a really powerful statement of intent in relation to neighbourhood policing. In relation to domestic abuse, again, this is a high priority area for both Steve as acting PCC and Joe as chief. We're in the process of recruiting 3 additional posts. The reality of these types of jobs is that we do need experienced people. We can't bring people in fresh who know very little about safeguarding. It just doesn't work, because these are going to be management or supervisor level posts, which will be challenging the work that goes on elsewhere in order to increase capacity and capability within that service. We are out to advert, but I'm still confident that we're going to have them in place April, May. Next one, call handlers. What was interesting, Chair, on last week's panel session with the force. So I think there was quite a bit of interest in the force control room, and there's a lot more to run in the force control room than meets the eye. We have in excess of 120 members of staff in there. We do have about a 10% turnover. It is difficult to recruit call handlers. It takes 3 months to train them up, and quite often some of them leave not long afterwards. So what we're going to do, we're going to permanently be in a state of over recruitment, just to make sure that we're trying to run with ideally no vacancies within that area. What I did say at the panel meeting last week, the training session, is that once we are through the pandemic, it may be good just to invite some members, if they wish, just to come and spend a little bit of time in the control room, just to get a little bit of a better understanding of what it looks like and what goes on, and some of the pressures that we see in practice when we are essentially dealing with people in extremis. Final one, technology. On the back of the precept increase, we've just agreed a £1 million investment around technology, around new body-worn devices, which is part of a wider initiative called Digital Evidence Management System, DEMS for short. This is essentially part of a wider national imperative to move to what we're called digital case files, whereby essentially all the evidence that we put towards the CPS will all be electronic in future, and that quite often starts with high quality footage taken at scenes by our officers. And what that means is the better quality video footage that we have quite often helps to as part of the investigative process. It also protects officers as well, because quite often when officers have complaints made against them, by the fact that they have the footage recorded, can quite often help professional standards deal with complaints. So there's lots of additional benefits other than capturing evidence on the scene. I think that with that, Chair, I'll stop speaking now, but I'm more than happy to attempt to answer questions that colleagues have. Thank you.
Thank you, Gary. Does any member have any questions or points they want to raise?
Chair, my hand is up.
Sorry, yeah, Councillor Jones.
Yes, I don't know whether Gary or Steve can answer this. I'm curious about the recruitment of officers, experienced officers from other forces. Have you actively gone out and advertised to other forces, which might be seen as a bit naughty, or have you relied entirely on the reputation of Durham Constabulary to attract members from other forces? Thank you, Chair.
Chair, I'm happy to answer that one. We have a permanent advert on the force website encouraging transferees to consider to join the force. We've temporarily suspended that for the time being because we are above our numbers, but in particular we are asking officers in other parts of the country who are detectives to come and join us. And what you find in practice, Brian, is quite often officers from southern forces may be happy to relocate to the northeast, but it tends not to work the other way around. Partly, I suspect, because of things like house prices. But it's an ongoing process that we have.
Thank you, Gary. Steve, do you want to make a comment?
Steve, thank you.
Yes, just very briefly. Part of the plan around the increase in precept is so that we can, in fact, when the opportunity arises, get transferees, which of course are more expensive than new recruits, don't forget. But of course, it's essential for us to maintain, or for the force to maintain, that experience balance. And as Gary just said about detectives, I was delighted to find out last week that there is my old force, Avon and Somerset, a sergeant from Avon and Somerset. I haven't found out who it is yet, who's transferring up here to join the collision investigation unit, but I'm keen to find out who it is, because I used to be on Rose Policing, so I probably know them. If nothing else, I can brief them about the warm clothes they need to bring when they come up here.
Thank you, Steve. No other questions or points? We've got the report there and the recommendation. Can we note the report, please?
Noted, Chair.
Thank you. Takes us on to the next item, which is the office restructure. Sharon, are you going to do this presentation, please? Or Steve?
Yep, Sharon's going to talk to the paper, but I just wanted to give a very brief context to this. As the paper points out, this was as a result of discussion I had with Ron very early on in my tenure as the chief executive. And this is linked to the openness and transparency thing. For many years, there's been a narrative of comparing the Office of the Police and Crime Commissioner with the old police authority. That perhaps was valid for a number of years, but actually when you compare what the office now does with what the police authority used to do, and this is no criticism, it's just a change in terms of responsibilities, the two, you can't really compare the two, to be brutally frank, and we needed to get away from that. And the restructure, in my mind, was part of that. It was recognising the important work that the office needed to do, and also to make sure that we had the right people in the right place doing the right thing. And thirdly, that anyone who wants to know what the office is doing and how it's restructured and how it's structured, they can click on a link and see very clearly what it is. In the past, and certainly what I inherited, and again, this is no criticism, there were people working in the office who were hidden, whether it be because they were apprentices or because they were interns and all this kind of stuff, for all sorts of reasons. But it was absolutely vital that there was transparency. And I have to say that in my experience, looking at other PCC offices, this still does happen, where the number of people working in an office is sort of hidden in a way, because people don't want to be open about, the need for the resource. I felt that was wrong, and that was one of the things that the restructure needed to address. And it's one of the reasons why there has been a small increase in terms of staff cost, but that's because it's no longer hidden in any shape or form. And I just wanted to make that point, because at the end of the day, Sharon finished the work, but it was essentially a piece of work that I started at Ron's behest. So just want to say that at the start. Thanks.
Thank you, Steve. Over to you, Sharon.
So thank you, Chair. So Steve's given something of a preamble there to the detail of the report. And over time, it's necessary. We work in public office. We have a dynamic environment that we work in as well. So it is necessary to take stock and appraise who is doing what, essentially, within your organisation. And to organise the staffing in such a way that maximises efficiency and effectiveness. So that was the primary ambition of the restructure. And as Steve has mentioned, that was an exercise that was started by the late Ron Hogg in recognition of the fact that we had certain people doing certain things, and that wasn't necessarily match fit in terms of delivering the business model of the office. In addition to that, what goes with the restructure is an appraisal of the hierarchy of responsibility and then the associated pay or the job evaluation that goes with that. So kind of what each post is remunerated in respect of that. And that's a critical piece of work, as I'm sure most people will be familiar with, because it ensures that you have an objective scheme that provides fair and competitive pay as well. So it was a piece of work that was commenced back in August 2019, approximately. I think we're getting on just for 18 months ago. And the budget envelope for that, because it was determined that we didn't necessarily have the resource and capability within the office to wholly manage that process ourselves. So a budget envelope was set aside, not exceeding £10,000, but in order to assist that process to be done as professionally and as objectively as it possibly could be. And a company named We Do HR, an external consultancy company, came in and assisted with that. And as I say, kind of had a kind of an objective look at what the scheme of the office was, where people were placed, the functions that were assigned to the different individual roles, and so on. 15 posts in all were scoped into the process, and they were notified accordingly, and engagement was undertaken with representative bodies, in this case Unison. They were formally requested to participate in the job evaluation process. The report goes on to inform in relation to the results of that restructure review, deletion of some posts, senior posts, and creation of more administrative posts as well. And then, as Steve has alluded to as well, mainstreaming of some 2 former intern roles who were very much kind of providing critical roles within the office. And more than anything, it was about kind of ensuring that there's some linkage in terms of career progression between those posts as well, as opposed to them being quite disparate in terms of responsibilities and also pay grades as well. So we now have something that's logical and can provide stepping stones as well. So the review didn't in all result in any redundancies or any reduction in pay, indeed, as well. The next paragraphs detail, and I won't speak to these in great detail, or we will be here a while, but detail the budget envelopes and how that has panned out through the course of that restructure. You will see, I think, that we did have a post that was shared with the Office of Police and Crime Commissioner for Cleveland. It was a criminal justice partnership manager post that was shared by them. And it would be right to say to you that because we decided to bring that capability wholly within our office, and indeed keep the individual assigned to that role into our office, that does represent a loss in income in the cash that we could claim for that. However, we have arguably gained more in terms of capability and capacity within the office, and future-proofing ourselves in terms of delivery going forward as well. I have included an organogram of the office as an appendix to the report. I know that this was something that Councillor Jones was keen to say, and I hope that that does now set out the family tree so that you can understand who is doing what within the office. So I think I shall just conclude by asking you all to note the report, and it is for information only because it is a process that has been concluded, but happy to take any comments or questions.
Thank you, Sharon. Steve, did you want to make a comment before I open it up?
Yeah, if I may, the other thing to bear in mind is that, of course, we all know that we are now going into hopefully a recovery period in relation to the pandemic, but also we are anticipating announcements next week, which is very likely to impact on the work of the office. This is an announcement by government around additional responsibilities for Police and Crime Commissioner offices potentially, and work that is likely to start fairly soon around that. So this isn't just about the here and now and the work that the office is currently doing and what we're delivering, and clearly that will then move on to the new PCC, but it's also about things that we know are coming, the horizon scanning that we know are coming to PCC offices across the whole of England and Wales fairly soon as well.
Thank you, Steve. I've got Councillor Boyce. Is the question?
Yeah. Yes, just a couple of points. If that's what it's going to cost, that's what it's going to cost. You know, you were the expert. You've got the HR sort of capabilities. Can I just ask what percentage the 870,000 is of the grant budget as a total, and how do we compare to other offices around the country? And with regards to the interns, I think at one point there's about 5 or 6 interns knocking about in the office. What are you saying that we sort of getting rid of the intern program, or is that going to be something that's going to be sort of continued? And what sort of career progression have the interns got? Thank you.
Sharon, do you want to answer?
So in terms of the first part of that, which was the £870, as a guide, PCC officers are not expected to cost more than 1% of the total grant received, and you know, the largest amount of which is then remitted across to the police force. We are below the 1%, Councillor Boynes, so I can assure you of that. There are, by comparison, we're quite a slim, lean office. You know, there are much bigger offices out there. I think we are just below 16.8 in total as an establishment, so we are not very big. The second part, sorry, if you could just remind me of the second part of that question, was about the internship, wasn't it?
Yeah, the interns.
Yeah,
there was a few interns knocking about a few years ago. I think Ron tried to encourage the intern programme. Now, when you were saying that the interns, are we still going to have interns, and is there any sort of career progression for them?
So absolutely, absolutely, we will still be able to host interns in future. The use of them, and you know, this is fairly common, had been brought in to take on pieces of work then actually became core business pieces of work. So that's at the point where you have to review and determine actually if that's kind of our business as usual now. That really needs to be mainstreamed rather than kind of become something that's lumped onto a much lower paid internship. But yes, we do have, we as I say, we have tried to kind of bring together some of those different post and salary levels, bring those close together so that there is the ability to progress. And there's a number of, well, you know, they're all really hard working. There's a number of very talented individuals who have expressed the desire to move on in towards leadership and management as well. And we see that there would be opportunities for them to use internships for a period of time, you know, perhaps, you know, in the way that it's more typically done for a period of 12 weeks or so, to help them with project development and so on.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Steve.
Chair.
Thank you, David. Steve, do you want to comment?
Yeah, just in relation to sort of comparisons with other offices, it is actually quite a difficult one. As I said before, we're open and transparent. What you see now is the staff that work in the office. There are forces, some of which might be quite close to us, and I'm not going to name them, where in fact, if you look at the numbers of staff, you think, oh, well, that's actually quite low for a large number, until you then look at all of the secondees from force, which don't count. And there are a number of PCC offices around the country that use that little bit of jiggery-pokery. The other point is that in terms of actual cost, having said we shouldn't be compared with the police authority, and I do believe that, we are still cheaper than the police authority used to be.
Thank you, Steve. Right, we've got the recommendations there. Can I ask the panel to note the report?
Move it, Chair.
Thank you. And we'll move on to item 8, which is delivery of priorities in the Police and Crime Victims Plan 2018-21. And welcome Sweetie this morning to present the report.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, everybody. I am Sweetie Sahani, and I'm head of the private office for the Office of the Police, Crime and Victims Commissioner. So this report is just providing an update to you all on the main delivery and achievements of the priorities set out in the Police, Crime and Victims Plan 2018-21, which was produced by the late PCVC Ron Hogg. So the vision included in the 2018 plan remains current, in that County Durham and Darlington are areas where all communities are safe, victims and vulnerable people feel supported, crime and reoffending are low, and people have confidence in policing and the criminal justice system. The plan includes 4 strategic outcomes, which are communities are safe and crime is reduced, which I'm going to put a particular focus on for the purpose of this presentation and talk through some of the challenges and achievements by the force during the pandemic over the last 12 months, which I'm sure you all agree has been a challenging time for us all. The rest of the outcomes are victims and vulnerables feel supported, reoffending is reduced, and rehabilitation is improved. People have confidence in the police and criminal justice system. So just highlights for you around communities are safe and crime is reduced during the COVID-19 pandemic. I don't intend on kind of like reading from an entire list for this presentation, but just to kind of like point out that throughout the pandemic, the force has demonstrated its commitment to delivering a COVID-19 effective model to ensure business as usual is achieved with communities and confidence being maintained. Forces engaged with the public and continued with a flexible and immediate response to the ever-changing central government guidance, which if anybody can put their hand up and say they absolutely fully understand it, I'll give them a chocolate bar this morning. Force has fully embraced working digitally, which I think is an excellent achievement. Confidence in the police and criminal justice system has remained a priority for the PCVC office and the force, and continues to be tracked, throughout the pandemic. Force and partners have embraced virtual working to maintain community engagement and service delivery to the public. A great pat on the backs for all our partners in respect of that. Force has adapted to working practices to ensure safe systems of working during the pandemic. Continues to monitor changing trends in crime and antisocial behaviour during the pandemic, and has adopted an appropriate approach to working with vulnerable people, particularly around domestic abuse, for example, where there's been lots of partnership focus on coercive and controlling behaviour, introduction of safe spaces, media campaigns, joint partnership campaigns, and regular monitoring of domestic abuse in general. An appropriate response to custody management whilst the pandemic's prevailed, and in general, the force continues to hold a plethora of policies in place to maintain the mental and physical health of police officers, police staff, and general population during the pandemic. Thought it was important just to kind of like pick out those main highlights, particularly during the pandemic, which I'm sure you'll agree has been a challenging time for all of us. The remainder of the report is around the 12 priorities which are included in the Police Crime and Victims Plan. And again, I've highlighted in the report against each of the priorities, all 12 of them, ensuring that victims are supported at all stages of the criminal justice system, address the root causes of offending and supporting rehabilitation, safeguarding vulnerable people, improving road safety, reducing the harm caused by alcohol and drugs, improving community safety in rural areas, tackling and preventing domestic abuse and sexual violence in all their forms, tackling and preventing hate crime, tackling and preventing fraud, tackling and preventing antisocial behaviour, tackling and preventing modern slavery, and finally tackling and preventing cyber-enabled crime. So I've given kind of like high-level examples about how those priorities and some achievements are under that. I'm happy for members obviously to pick out anything they want from the report and take any questions or comments. A recommendation is for panel members to note the information contained in this report. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Sweetie. Can we note the report? And can I open it up for questions? Steve?
Not a question, but just a comment, and to remind members that in terms of the existing police and crime plan and the way in which the office ensures that the force makes progress on them, we do that primarily through the executive board, which is held monthly. In fact, we've got the next one, which will be the last one, I think, before Purden next week. And that's where I have to say, certainly in my tenure, the force has always taken this executive board very seriously. The engagement is excellent. It's not to say that it is not challenging at times for the force, because it should be, and it is. And they respond very positively. it's one of the areas that I certainly I'm going to take away to look at going into the next with the next PCC, in terms of the way in which we advertise the fact that that hard work goes on. It's always been something of a little bit of a not a concern, but a question mark over how we should do that, because there's excellent work that happens at these board meetings. But I just wanted to emphasise that in terms of that continuity and the way in which the office and the office holder of PCC holds the chief and the force to account around the plan, that's how we do it.
Thank you, Steve. Sharon, did you want to make another comment? Sharon?
So I think Councillor Boyce has a question as well, but I was just going to come in and add to that we do publish the performance, the PCVC work plan in which we monitor this on our website if anybody wanted to look at it there as well.
Thank you. I've got Councillor Wallace and Councillor Boyce who raised, no, got that wrong. Councillor Boyce, David? Yeah,
just with regard to the priorities, I don't think anybody can argue against the priorities. You know, they are very, very important. I think, how do we prioritise the priorities though? You know, if you've got 12 priorities there, what sits underneath it? How much time are we devoting? How much resources, how much manpower are we devoting to each priority? Because at the end of the day, 12 priorities, they can't all be like urgent priorities, because there's going to be some priorities that's going to need more attention than others.
Yes, Lucy, I'll come back on that one if I may.
Steve.
Thanks. Yeah, David, you make a really valid point. And when I was still a serving officer in my former role as chair of the Federation, I often used to say, if everything's a priority, then nothing is a priority. And this is very true. Certainly in terms of going forward, and the new Police and Crime Commissioner, of course, in terms of formulating the plan, then they will have their own ideas in terms of what needs to be a priority. And one of the things I would certainly be encouraging the Commissioner to do is obviously engage with the public. You know, what should the local priorities be? Now, interestingly, and I have reported this to the panel before, the elucid system that we use for engagement, where we've reached 13,000 people, consistently tells us that the single biggest item that our communities are concerned with is effectively road policing issues. It's not murder. It's not things of that nature, in fact, and so that's got to play a part in it. But of course, in terms of elected officials and in terms of the chief constable, there needs to be professional judgment in terms of the use of resources, and that's where this dialogue with the force is so vitally important in terms of you know, where a focus needs to be. And it's something that, in my view, probably needs to constantly change and move. You know, when you're making progress in one area, then you know, you've got a finite level of resources, and the force needs to look at using them in other ways. The important thing, though, of course, is that any published police and crime plan, because this is the whole point of holding a police and crime commissioner to account and the commission holding the chief to account, is that you can see progress in these areas where these priorities are. But you make a valid point, David, and of course, you know, we could probably add to that list of priorities, I dare say. But if everything's a priority, nothing's a priority. But policing is a large and complex business and has an awful lot to do.
Yeah, thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Thank you, David. Thank you, Steve. I've got Sharon. You have a question, Sharon?
So I think Steve has said this in another way, but essentially, Councillor Boyce, it's based on you know, triaging and understanding what the needs are, so assessing the needs and also the risk as well. And yes, whilst we have a feed of information that tells us about things like road safety, we're also acutely aware of things like hidden harm issues such as domestic abuse, sexual violence as well. Some of those priorities are clearly kind of more slow burner issues as well, that take a longer period of time deliver, or interventions will be delivered in a different way, as opposed to kind of more immediate interventions for victims as well. So it is very dynamic, it is shifting all the time. You know, we liaise closely with the force and with our partners, because they form you know, part of our understanding. They assist us in understanding where the needs are in the community, and we respond to those accordingly. I mentioned the PCVC work plan, and one of the other things we do is the thematic scrutiny of the different priorities at each of our executive boards each month as well. Again, all of that's published on our website if anybody ever wanted to have a look at that. Get some really good reports, and we ask some very hard questions of the force as well as executive board around how they are tackling particular priorities. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Sharon. I haven't got anyone else indicating, so the report has been noted, and I'll take us on to the next item, which is item 9, the quarterly performance report. And this morning I welcome James Atkinson to present the report, please.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I'm James Atkinson, the Accountability and Scrutiny Officer for the PCVC's office. This panel's report will focus upon the key performance questions 5 and 8 and outcomes 3 and 4, which is reoffending is reduced and rehabilitation is improved, and people have confidence in the police and criminal justice system. So under the heading and outcome, reoffending is reduced and rehabilitation is improved, and how well are we reducing reoffending, I would direct members to point number 5 of the report, which tells us that the Early Help and Stronger Families programme approach includes a new way in which partners are able to request and help gain support for children, young people and families that they feel would benefit from additional help and support to ensure that those young people achieve positive outcomes, and the funding for this Troubled Families programme has been extended. Moving on to point number 6 around reducing reoffending. The PCVC's office, together with Durham Constabulary and the 2 local authorities in our area, were successful in obtaining funding around the Safer Streets Fund, which is around £784,000. The funding is being used to support situational crime prevention. So this is things like target hardening, security equipment to addresses, which have been victims of burglary and repeat burglaries in their properties in close proximity to those burgled properties. This is specifically focused around hoarding, mainly amongst one other area, and this is with the overarching aim of preventing residential burglaries. And the Home Office have committed another £21 million nationally to this project as well in 2021-22. Under the key performance question, how well are we rehabilitating people who have offended, I would direct members to point number 9, which tells us that Durham Constabulary is currently reviewing its out-of-court disposal framework, which is as per the National Police Chief Counsel's out-of-court disposal and charging strategy and guidance. And this is to ensure that interventions are as effective as they can be. The change in the framework and policy is likely to result in a reduction in the number of out-of-court disposal options available. But we might see some increases in that just because of the way the policy is applied. Increases in the actual use, sorry. Point 10, there was a review of the Checkpoint Deferred Prosecution programme, and the analysis of the evaluation from the 2-year follow-up concluded that that results were positive, and the results from the trial indicate that the prevalence of reoffending for the checkpoint cohort was 36% compared to 46.9% for the non-checkpoint control group, which indicates a 10.3% reduction in reoffending amongst a moderate risk cohort. And I know the panel received a presentation on this last week at the development session, so that's quite useful to put those 2 things together, I think. Within point number 11, it's just worth noting that community hub meetings have now been extended to include service providers such as housing, drug and alcohol services. And that's just an increase in additionality. Point 12, the government has published its refreshed integrated offender management strategy at the end of 2020, which refocuses offender management on neighbourhood crime and things like robbery, burglary, theft from a person and vehicle theft. After that national one's come out, it's quite clear that Durham doesn't deviate much from the approach at all. They've been doing that before this national strategy's come out. And the group does. The groups involved in that are awaiting operational guidance, which is due in April this year. I think that's a good example of the proactive work and of the constabulary to be able to look at that and say we pretty much match up with a new strategy that's come out. Point 15 in this section, the unplanned prison releases project has identified a potential gap in support services for a small number of men who were held within HMP Durham, who were released often at short notice with no formal arrangements in place to support their safe return back to their community. So evidence suggests that this creates an increased risk of harm to both individuals and communities, increases reoffending and disrupts engagement with support services following release from prison. And our stakeholder consultation around this has confirmed a strong commitment to working in partnership and an ambition to find new ways of working together to best support those leaving custody in that group. Moving on to outcome number 4, people have confidence in the police and criminal justice system under key performance question 7. How confident are people in the criminal justice system? So in point 24, the use of virtual remand hearings by the force over the COVID-19 period have been very successful and have had a lot of partner buy-in from partners such as prisons and the CPS. So the virtual remand hearings were quickly identified as a means by which court business could be progressed during COVID-19 lockdown. And we know Durham, one of the first forces in the country to enable this, despite the additional demands this placed upon force capacity. So it's allowed swift action by the force and partnership cooperation, which has assisted Durham to remain above the national average in terms of expectations of recovery around that court backlog. Under key performance question 8, how confident are people in the police? For direct members to the section pertaining to PCVC external scrutiny, point 34, despite challenges around virtual scrutiny processes, the PCVC's office has developed 2 new panels in 2021, which is the Independent Complaint Scrutiny Panel and the BAME Arrest, Use of Force and Stop and Search Panel. So the panels the summary of those panels is they aim to facilitate the scrutinisation of public complaints and expressions of dissatisfaction. And the bus panel, the use for stop and search stuff, looks at correct process of the application of police powers. One of our groups, our out of court disposal scrutiny panel, which met recently, this is point 35, DIP sampled 15 cases, and out of those 15, all of them were scored well, 14 of which were scored consistent with police policies and CPS Code of Crown Prosecutors, and 1 was scored as appropriate but with observations. Point 36, there has also been a new group developed, which is called the External Strategic Scrutiny Governance Group. It held its inaugural meeting and it's got another meeting in March. And the membership of this group consists of all the subsidiary chairs of our external scrutiny panels, and they meet at that group. And the group aims to provide the ability to identify themes of best practice, problem solve and funnel issues. So from the scrutiny groups to make sure that they don't dissipate, to make sure that we can really track an issue from its inception all the way through to its resolution. That is the end of my report, Chair. So thank you.
Thank you. Very comprehensive report, James. I'll open it up for members for questions. Steve, do you want to come in first?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Just to say in front of the panel, really, thank you again to James and my office in terms of, whilst everything else has been going on, we've been revising this, the way in which we hold the force to account, and the comprehensive way in which we now have panels that can provide real scrutiny in relation to the activity of the force, and it's really important. The next stage, now we've done all of this work, is to push the message out there that this does happen, because of course a lot of people don't know that it does happen, but it does, and we need to make sure that we let people know the hard work that we do on behalf of all of our communities in holding the force to account. Absolutely,
thank you, Steve. Sharon?
So I think just following on from what Steve said, just in the spirit of letting people know about our hard work and the yield from that. So we have met quite a bit with Home Office. They're always very interested in Durham Constabulary anyway, because of its outstanding status, and they are particularly interested in our office in terms of holding the force to account and how we do it as well. And we have, so I met with them last week, took them through our whole scrutiny process and demonstrated to them how we use that in terms of challenges made at Executive Board and the whole governance structure as well. And we were informed by them that they considered our approach to be gold standard, as in absolutely excellent in terms of how, ensuring proper governance of the police force. So just to share that with you.
That's good. Councillor Boyce?
Yes, yeah. It's just how much notice should we be taking this report with? It's the last 12 months with regards to a third of offenders are re-offending. Is that because of the COVID situation, the fact there isn't the police presence on the streets? And if we're thinking about what's going to be happening in the future as we're coming out of the pandemic, are we expecting that number to drop? Because a third does seem as though we do need to put extra resources, manpower, to be able to help combat that. But if it's just to be a blip because of what's happened during the pandemic, do we need to be as concerned as we should be? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, David. Would anybody like to comment back?
James, have you got anything specific thoughts around that question before I say something?
Yes, Steve. So I suppose with regard to the reoffending rate, I think that reoffending rate, Councillor Boyce, has been relatively consistent, partially on the ways that we measure the data, and also you're obviously always going to have that core of the hardest to reach reoffenders, which are obviously exceptionally challenging in themselves. There are quite a few schemes that we have in place and we work on to reach those people, but I think the thing I would say on it is, yeah, that you're always going to have that core of reoffenders. You talk about things like intergenerational reoffending as well, which obviously play quite a large impact on that. Steve?
Thank you, James. Sharon, did you want to come in?
Yeah, I think just to add to that, yes, in some respects, a third might look quite negative, and ideally we would like it to be 0 in terms of reoffending. But we are talking, and I think we've referenced this at previous police and crime panels. We are talking about people with a life course of criminality quite often, and it can take. It's a big ship to turn around in terms of reducing reoffending. I think the other thing that and efforts, massive efforts, including our diversion rate and some of the early years intervention work that we do, will all form part of that whole system approach to reducing reoffending. The other thing to remember is that we perform comparatively well, so considerable resources are put into this. This is not without challenge, though. You're quite right, Councillor Boyce, that there are challenges. The demand profile can go up, and sometimes it seems that there's little rhyme or reason to that, and we have to be more responsive rather than doing the bit that we like to do, which is the prevention and early intervention bits. Okay, thank you.
Can I just come back, Chair?
Yes, David.
Yeah, I just mentioned the reoffending as one item, but the whole report, as I say, we've lived through exceptional circumstances this last year, and this report is based on what's happened during those exceptional circumstances. So I could have come up with another 5 or 6 things. How seriously and how much notice should we be given to the items on this report, given that we're coming out of the pandemic? So what's happened prior to the pandemic starting and what's happening after? We've got this sort of space in the middle where a lot of things have probably gone on. I'll just say sort of off-road motorbikes, they've been running amok because there hasn't been the police presence. Now we could say, well, let's put a hell of a lot more resources in to help combat the off-road bikes. But if the police presence is going to be there again, do we really need to do that? I'm just saying, how much notice and how much resources should we be sort of devoting to some of these items, given that we're hopefully, touch wood, coming out of the pandemic the next couple of months?
Yeah, and you're right to say it has been quite a unique period. I think the key for us, what matters in terms of not just the performance and the crime figures themselves, is public confidence and that legitimacy issue that people can see police responses and police reactions to this going on. So I appreciate what you say. It's kind of looking back over. It is a snapshot in time, and undoubtedly it will change. So it will perhaps not be as comparative as we would like it to be, because it's the COVID period that Durham Constabulary have been policing through.
Yeah. Cheers.
Okay, thank you, Steve. Do you want the last comment come in?
Yeah, just to point out, as I did mention earlier, in terms of recovery phase for policing, this is going to be a real challenge. There's no doubt, because demand is undoubtedly going to increase from where we are now. It was already high pre-pandemic, but of course the pandemic absolutely has changed everything. And you're right, David. And there will need to be a pause and a check and a refocus in terms of what those priorities need to be and what needs to happen, because of course the police is only one small part of the whole of the criminal justice journey and ecosystem, and this is what makes things rather challenging sometimes, particularly for police and crime commissioners, around influencing other partners in order to address issues who have all got and have had during the pandemic the draw on their resources. So it's if people think we're out of the woods now, then that isn't the case around policing, and that was really my very strong feeling in terms of precept setting and the need for continued investment in resources for the force for exactly these kinds of reasons, because things are going to get more challenging, definitely.
Thank you, Steve. We've got the recommendation there for the panel to note the contents of the report. Can we agree, please?
Agreed, Chair.
And we'll move on to item 10, which is the PCVC's decision records. And I'll ask Sharon to present the report, please.
Thank you, Chair. Members of the panel will be familiar with this report. It's a standing agenda item that comes to all panels. Decision records are made in respect of key decisions and indeed are required, given that we are a public office. And it's right that we publish those. They are all kept up to date on our website as well. We detail the process as in the paragraphs under the decision-making process there, and also kind of set out some of the parameters and criteria around our decisions. So I will move, if I may, to Appendix 2, which just details some of the decisions that have been taken in this period. This is a rolling log of decisions that's kept. We are very committed to transparency, as you will have seen from our COPAC award. So some of these you will have seen before. I think the most recent ones that I could bring to your attention are number 5 onwards. So that would be reference 2021-005 in terms of the contribution made to the Police Arboretum Memorial Trust, an amount of £20,000. a national collaboration agreement in respect of modern slavery and organised immigration crime programme, and that's something that seeks to bind police and crime commissioners as well as their associated forces into a coordinated approach to tackle modern slavery, and rightly so we have signed up to that, as has the Chief Constable. Also included there is the decision notice in respect of the finalised terms for the new custody facility, the land acquisition of that as well. And members will be aware from our previous briefings to you that PCC took a decision on that matter, and that continues through its gateway stages at the present time. We also had the decision made in respect of the budget, the medium-term financial plan, which Gary spoke to earlier in the meeting. And then, in addition, we've also published a decision record in terms of our decision to enter into a collaboration agreement around the national capability network that has been set up in respect of forensic investigations. Okay, so the recommendation was to note the contents of the report, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Can we agree the contents of the report, members?
Noted, Chair.
Thank you. Does any member have any questions? No. Nobody's indicated. Can I thank you and move the agenda on to item 11, which is HMIC FRS inspections, and I'll ask James to present the report, please.
Thank you, Chair. We're coming into what I would consider to be HMIC report season, where we're getting quite a lot of them. There are 4 detailed in this report, which are around disproportionate use of police powers, an inspection on the effectiveness of regional organised crime units, safe to share Liberty and Southall Black Sisters super complaint on police and an immigration statement and immigration status, which is specifically to do with domestic abuse and reporting domestic abuse when people are here illegally, and how that's going to impact this their residency or not, and pre-charge bail and released under investigation, striking a balance. So I'm just going to draw your attention to some of the most prevalent inspections, things that have a lot of cross-cutting themes and things that are really, you know, quite heavily focused upon and macro. So the first thing to mention, which actually is detailed in the bottom of the report, which we were expecting, which has happened, is the COVID-19 inspection in Durham Constabulary. The findings of this report have not been published yet, but we have had some very positive initial comments from HMIC on their Durham Constabulary's performance around that, which is really, really encouraging, because obviously the way police has had to respond to COVID-19 has been, well, for the most part, unprecedented. So that's really a good news story as far as the constabulary are concerned. And the other one I wanted to talk about a little bit was disproportionate use of police powers, which only came out on the 26th of February this year. So the main finding of that inspection has been that police forces are still unable to explain why powers are used disproportionately based on ethnicity. So obviously that's quite a pertinent topic at the moment, nationally and globally. They also found that over the 35 years since the introduction of stop and search, police still can't explain why those powers are used disproportionately. And the inspectorate called for police leaders to consider whether focus on stop and search on drug possession, is an effective use of the powers. And they also called for police forces to analyse their data and either explain with evidence the reasons for disproportionality in stop and search and use in force, or take clear actions to address it. So I think putting that in the Durham context, there are many strands of work which seek to address the issue of disproportionality and appropriateness surrounding use of force and stop and search. So some examples of this are the bus panel, which focused on BAME arrest, use of force and stop and search, which I mentioned earlier in my last report, the independent complaint scrutiny panel, which has recently been set up as well, And we also have those external scrutiny internal feedback loops with Durham Constabulary to make sure that those any outcomes from our external scrutiny are really followed up. It's obviously also acknowledged that more work is to be done to continue addressing concerns highlighted within the inspection. There is quite a lot of work that is in the pipeline, so to speak, regarding this topic. So those are the two sort of most prevalent. The other ones are very specific and very police operational. So I will not go into the detail of those, but they are there for the panel's information. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, James. We have 2 recommendations there. Can we agree the recommendations and then I'll open it up?
Agreed, Chair.
Thank you. And then I'll go straight to Steve. Steve, you wanted to come in?
Yeah, thank you. Not contained in that report because it was probably right, but just for the panel's information, the most recent HMIC FRS statement in relation to the fire service did contain some commentary in relation to governance of fire services, fire and rescue services, and fire authorities, which again, joining the dots, suggests that the government fairly soon might be making an announcement in relation to a change around that governance, which is likely to impact on PCCs around England and Wales. I just wanted to add that little bit.
Any comments from members or questions? No? Thank you, Steve, for that. Can we move on? I'm sure that's been noted. We'll move on to item 12, which is the complaints update. And Helen, the monitoring officer, would you like to present a report? Is there any report?
Yes, thank you, Chair. As you've said, my name's Helen Lynch. I'm the monitoring officer and clerk to the panel. The panel will recall that at your meeting in October, you approved a revised procedure for handling complaints against the PCVC. And it was also agreed at that meeting that you would be given an update at each of your regular meetings of complaints received and to include any complaints that had been rejected without consideration to the panel. Complaints can only be rejected without consideration by the panel under the procedure if the complaint actually falls outside of the scope of the procedure. So it's very limited circumstances in which a matter wouldn't be referred to you. But it is in the interest of transparency and good practice that we do let you know of any such complaints. Within the period since the last meeting, we have only had one complaint in, and it was one such complaint that didn't actually meet the criteria, as it wasn't about the PCVC, actually related to an operational policing matter. So rather than it be dealt with by the panel under the procedures, it's been referred to the relevant police department for consideration. And there aren't any other complaints in relation to the PCVC that are outstanding. So the recommendation is for the panel to note the report.
Thank you, Helen. Can we agree and note the report, please?
Agreed, Chair.
Thank you. It takes us on to item 13. Is any other business? I haven't been notified of any other business. It's a time to say if you feel you have some. And with that, it concludes the business for the part of the meeting before the broadcast ends. I'd like to thank those members of the public and media who have watched this meeting. Could all members please ensure their microphones are on mute until we have received confirmation that the live broadcast has ended. Thank you.